The black supermarket manager humiliated in front of customers. No one knows he holds records that will expose the entire corporation. They laughed at him before he even swiped his badge. A customer tossed his grocery coupons in the air like confetti and joked, "Maybe you need glasses, manager." The smile on their faces cut deeper than any blade. In that bright supermarket aisle filled with neon lights and gamely polite chatter, Marcus Cole stood motionless. Tall, impeccably dressed in his charcoal gray suit and crisp white shirt, his hands rested calmly at his sides. His skin was deep ebony, his expression unreadable, his eyes weary not from physical strain but from the weight of being seen as less before he'd even started. His colleagues around him shifted uncomfortably. No one intervened. No one spoke. Marcus had worked at Metromax superstores for nearly 15 years. He'd started at the overnight stockrooms and climbed his way up through every department, earning promotions, commendations, and the grudging respect of store owners. He had an MBA locally earned, a spotless record. 9 months ago, after the regional manager departed, he became store manager of their flagship location. Sales had increased, employee turnover dropped. Yet today, one shopper's offhand jibe echoed louder than a year of steady performance. "Maybe you could explain why the shelves still look empty at noon," the same man sneered to his companion, loud enough for Marcus to hear. Laughter erupted from a group waiting in line. Not vicious, but the kind that signals permission to degrade. Marcus inhaled slowly. He reached into his breast pocket, lifted out a leather-bound folder and tucked it gently away. The folder contained documents, internal audits, emails, memos that detailed a pattern of discrimination across Metromax, keyword search records showing how customers of certain races got slower checkout speeds, HR memos covering up racial bias complaints, scheduling software sabotage targeting staff of color. Documents that could topple the department heads, the regional offices, even the board. Nobody knew. Not customers. Not the staff pretending this wasn't happening. Only Marcus and one trusted assistant. He stepped forward, cleared his voice, and said in a calm, even tone, "I understand your concerns, sir. We had an unexpected delivery issue this morning. The shelves will be restocked shortly. Please let me know if you'd like me to help personally." The customer shot a mocking smile and returned to his phone. The line trickled forward. Marcus stepped back behind the customer service desk, his heart pounding, yet his face still composed. This would not define him. Not here. Not now. Marcus's rise had never been easy. He had been shuffled aside for positions he was obviously qualified for, passed over for white colleagues with lesser credentials. Corporate culture praised team fit while quietly punishing anyone who spoke up. But Marcus had learned the language of resilience. He knew how to be polite until politeness becomes weaponized. He had filed complaints behind the scenes, but they vanished into bureaucracy. So 2 years ago, he began documenting everything: screenshots of employee conversations, time-stamped logs of scheduling anomalies, discrepancies in store surveys. He enlisted the help of a legal aid nonprofit that supports whistleblowers. The folder he carried now represented months of work, risk, sleepless nights, hope. He wasn't naive, he knew how high the stakes were. Yet today, in front of customers and staff, he had to act normal. The corporate lens saw only his uniform and his skin. They believed what they wanted. And until he made them look closer, nothing would change. After closing hours, he returned to the empty store. He walked the aisles, pushing carts aside. He retrieved the folder from the safe in his office, a small steel box only he and his assistant Rosa knew the combination to. Rosa, a former corporate auditor herself, had helped him sift through thousands of pages. They sat in his office, low light from the security lamp filtering through half-drawn blinds. "Are we ready?" Rosa asked softly. She had seen Marcus stand accountable for more cynical acts than what he'd endured today. Her own experiences mirrored his. He nodded. "Tonight, we submit to the attorney. The rest is out of our hands." Rosa exhaled. Once it gets rolling, there's no going back. He closed the folder gently. We're not going back anyway. They knew this meant potential retaliation. Marcus could be demoted, fired, sued. The board could bury everything or force him out. But more stores, more employees depended on the outcome than feared it. The next morning, news crews descended outside the store. A whistleblower had revealed Metro Max's internal documents to a national consumer protection group. Allegations: systemic racial bias, flawed AI scheduling that predicted staff race, discriminatory cashier line assignment favoring white customers, HR complaints buried under performance issues. The exposé named Marcus Cole as the confidential whistleblower. Inside the store, employees watched the live stream. Some wept. Others hugged each other. Rosa pressed a trembling hand against Marcus's shoulder. Corporate released a statement calling the whistleblower's accusations premature and misleading and promised an internal review. Customers queued and aisles paused. Marcus stood in the main aisle, sweatshirt thrown over his suit jacket, holding a microphone at a community hearing outside the store. His legs shook slightly as he spoke, but his voice projected clearly. I stood here yesterday in this store, wearing the same uniform I've worn for 15 years, and was ridiculed by people who thought I was anything but the manager. They laughed. They whispered. Some staff turned away. But I've carried documents showing years of suppressed complaints and calculated bias that systematically hurt employees and customers of color. He paused. Tears sprang unexpectedly to his eyes. This isn't about me. It's about every person told they don't belong because of color. It's about dignity, equity, justice. He turned to the crowd. My father taught me, integrity isn't convenient, it's necessary. A hush fell over the assembled. Local activists voiced support. Former employees testified. A class action lawsuit was filed by dozens of former staff. Metro Max's stock price slid. Investors asked questions. Lawsuits piled up. Corporate headquarters called for Marcus to appear at an emergency board meeting. They offered him a severance package if he agreed to resign quietly. He refused. Boardroom windows looked out over the downtown skyline as Marcus stood to address directors, lawyers, and executives. You offered a settlement. I declined it publicly. Not out of spite but out of principle. Because if I walk away, you win by default. Because if change remains optional, bias remains unpunished. Corporate counsel warned, we could pursue litigation. You signed non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreements. He nodded. I know. I will not sign. I will face that risk. One board member sneered, you're just a disgruntled manager now, Howard. Marcus gave no reaction. His mentor, an older white executive who'd quietly supported him, stood. Marcus has done what we saw too little of a leader who values truth more than profit. Others nodded. They'd watched him inspire store-level safety and improved customer service through genuine inclusion efforts. The vote was close. But a majority agreed to launch an independent audit led by an external firm, to review claims and reform policies. Marcus would head a new oversight committee but with protections outlined by the board. It wasn't total victory. Some dismissed it as damage control. But Marcus knew it was a beginning. Weeks later, he visited smaller Metro Max locations across the region. He met with staff in break rooms and counted schedules. He listened to stories: customers denied credit, staff overlooked for promotion, people too afraid to speak. He took notes, sometimes emotional. In one rural store, a cashier's eyes welled up. She had been told she'd smiled too happily for a white community. Another stalker had been excluded from meetings. A night manager had used slurs over the scheduling chat. The patterns repeated. Marcus ensured those voices were heard. He lobbied for accelerated promotion tracks for Black and Latino employees. He worked with HR to reset scheduling algorithms. He made sure bias investigations were transparent and ensured settlements didn't include confidentiality. Media coverage praised the scandal that sparked real reform. Top executives resigned. A new CEO was appointed with a stated commitment to equity. Then came the hardest test. A competitor invited Marcus to speak at a national retail symposium titled Ethics in Commerce. The audience included executives from companies that had profited from Metromax's decline. Marcus would be surrounded by men and women who one-eyed him warily. A hush fell the moment he stepped on stage. He delivered his speech without notes. He told the story of walking through the store that afternoon, hearing jokes one person had tossed a grape at him and called him Grape Juice Man. He described the moment he reached into his pocket, aware of the folder he carried, deciding between hush and truth. He spoke of the lawsuits, the reforms, the resistance. He called out the systemic bias in retail, in AI software, in boardrooms. His voice rose, if we do not name the poison, we cannot cure it. And if we ask those who suffer to always defend their suffering, we ask them to carry shame that is not theirs. Applause that first minute was cautious. By the end, standing ovation. Emotional executives approached him afterwards. Some with tears. Some reluctant but respectful. He held firm. Months passed. Policies changed. Hiring panels diversified. Transparency in complaints improved. Customers saw changes: better service lines, more equitable scheduling. Former employees received settlements. Metromax's public image revived, but differently. One afternoon Marcus returned to the flagship store. A new employee approached him, a young black man, fresh uniform, baffled eyes. "Mr. Cole," he asked, voice small. "I just got promoted to assistant manager." Marcus beamed. "Congratulations." He shook the young man's hand. "You earned it." The young man looked up. "All because of you." Marcus looked out across the store. The aisles gleamed. Employees of every color worked quickly. Customers moved along calmly. No laughter mocking uniforms. No whispers about manager's skin. He touched the pocket where the folder once lived. He thought of his father who had lost jobs, dreamed bigger than doors allowed, told him, "Son, dignity walks with you, even when they try to strip it away." He thought of Rosa, fighting legal risks. Of staff, hesitant voices now growing strong. He exhaled. He walked forward, onto the store floor, not as a man hiding evidence but as a leader who turned humiliation into accountability. Because true justice isn't hidden in files. It's built in public light, with voices that refuse to be silenced. News of Marcus's reforms had spread beyond the retail world. Industry analysts called him the accidental hero of corporate awakening. Trade publications interviewed him about restructuring HR, resetting AI bias, and creating transparent whistleblower systems. He accepted interviews sparingly, always redirecting credit to the employees who'd come forward, to Rosa, and to the whistleblower legal team. He rarely mentioned the supermarket aisles where the humiliation began, preferred talking about policy, dignity, and the slow labor of transformation. Behind closed doors at Metromax headquarters, though, executives monitored sales, public sentiment, and staffing metrics, some visibly improved, others stubbornly lagging. There were whispers that regional managers resisted the changes, quietly shredding audit notices, postponing diversity training. Marcus traveled to those stores too, wearing the same name badge, same calm resolve, same memory of the day coupons were thrown at him for being invisible. Despite resistance, the oversight committee he led convened monthly, and external audits delivered findings that could no longer be ignored. Local regulators began formal investigations. Civil suits multiplied. Still, Metromax's board voted to publicly support the reforms. A new chief diversity officer was hired, and numerous staff of color were promoted to leadership positions. Employee retention rose. Instances of customer complaints about staff increased briefly until corporate tightened enforcement of respectful behavior. It was messy. Real change usually is. 6 months later, Marcus received an email invitation from a philanthropic foundation devoted to social justice in business. They asked him to participate in a documentary series profiling individuals who turned personal indignity into systemic change. The shooting would take place near his hometown, focusing on his childhood and early years. He hesitated before saying yes. Opening the door to his past felt risky. But he agreed, if only to show how costumed corporate facades break down under the weight of accountability. The filming day began at his father's old neighborhood. Narrow streets, shuttered corner stores, weathered clapboard homes. The director asked him about that day in the store, what it felt like when coupons were tossed, after the laughter, before the folder filled his hand. Marcus described the anger, the sting, the disbelief, and then the decision to document everything. I realized that if I remained silent, I'd become part of the noise, the invisibility. The crew later filmed in the Metromax flagship store. He walked slowly through the aisles, pointing out where interviews had taken place, where documents were gathered, where staff had first entered schedules that fell heavily on people they assumed would accept less. He paused before the produce section. "This is where a customer overloaded his basket and joked I needed glasses," Marcus said with quiet bitterness. "I filed the details that night." The documentary team asked about Rosa. Marcus became animated. "She was the only person I could trust fully." He described her legal knowledge, her empathy, her willingness to risk her job. "She appeared in the film too steady, articulate, exact, with the warmth of someone who'd seen both sides of imbalance and chosen justice." Later, they interviewed an older white executive who had supported him. The man's voice broke as he spoke. "I watched Marcus stand tall when others remained silent. He gave us no excuse not to do better." The film premiered at a Justice Film Festival. Marcus attended quietly. He sat beside his father, dressed in a crisp suit, a humble pie of pride in his expression. The documentary ended with text, "Years of bias documented. Policies rewritten. A corporate empire begins to hold itself accountable." When it ended, the audience rose not just for Marcus, but for the staff whose voices had finally been amplified. His father stood too. They held eye contact briefly. No words. Just gratitude. Upon returning home, Marcus found persistent fallout. An internal memo leaked some resistant regional managers had begun staging retaliation in small ways, denying shift differentials, slowing promotions, over-supervising staff of color. Rosa brought the memo to Marcus during lunch. "We're not done," she said. He nodded. "We never are." He called the compliance firm. They launched an immediate follow-up investigation. They recommended disciplinary action against several store managers, some demoted, some terminated, others transferred with remedial retraining required. Metromax announced it publicly, calling the measures part of a renewed commitment. The press covered it some grudgingly. Marcus issued a statement: "Change means holding people accountable. Without that, reform becomes myth." Employees started approaching him again, this time, with stories of small shifts, second chances, promotions given after training. When Marcus walked the aisles now, customers no longer stared, not in the same way. Some recognized him. A few whispered compassionately, "You're the guy from the news." He'd smile, nod. One afternoon, he met a former stockroom worker, an older black man, who'd been demoted to maintenance, told he lacked executive presence after complaints about racial slurs in scheduling. The man shook Marcus's hand with tears in his eyes. "You gave me food stamps and hope," he said. "You gave us dignity." Marcus found himself speechless. Meanwhile, the board began considering expansion. But there was backlash from some franchisees in conservative markets. They warned that new DEI branding hurt sales. Marcus gained a seat at the expansion committee. His role, vetting potential franchise partners to ensure alignment with equity standards. He accepted. This time, he was inside the tent. 1 year into the reforms, Metromax launched an initiative to support small minority vendors. They retooled cafeteria sourcing, merchandising, training modules, all to include local diverse businesses. Sales weren't negatively impacted. Research showed customer satisfaction rose in stores with more inclusive staffing and vendor representation. Marcus's father retired from deliveries. Now, he ran a small soul food pop-up at weekend farmers markets. Marcus visited him one Saturday. The line snaked around the truck. He gave Marcus 2 pies, sweet potato and peach, for old time's sake, he said with a laugh that creased his face. They stood next to each other, community gathered around, customers smiling, stories trading. Marcus felt something settle in his chest. At CEO quarterly address, the new CEO credited Marcus and his committee. We exposed an uncomfortable truth and transformed our culture. That took courage led by one man behind a manager's badge. Rosa was promoted to Chief Compliance Officer. Marcus was offered a senior corporate position, overseeing diversity and ethics across all branches. He paused before accepting. This job would mean less store floor time, more boardroom hours, more travel. He asked his father's advice. You follow what's fair, his father answered simply. If they're building on the work, then go. He accepted. But he retained a connection to the flagship store, visiting occasionally, speaking to night shift teams, listening. 2 years later, Metromax published its first diversity report. Transparency included retention rates by race, promotion pipeline demographics, customer satisfaction broken down by ethnicity. They pledged elimination of racial bias in AI systems. They published audit results. They committed to no confidentiality clauses in settlements related to discrimination. They made public investment in minority-owned vendor development. The change was steady, imperfect, and ongoing. Marcus received one final surprise. A letter arrived from the same customer who had tossed the coupons and mocked him months earlier. The man apologized publicly on social media and in local news. He volunteered at a community job fair that Marcus's store hosted. He now worked as an assistant manager trainee at a small chain competitor, trying to learn how to treat people with equity. He said Marcus inspired him to reconsider how he perceived people he once underestimated. Marcus read the letter quietly, then smiled. He forwarded it to Rosa. Even the hardest stones can change. They walked into the office together. New staff posed for a group photo in the flagship store. The photo included Marcus, Rosa, the CEO, and administrators, but centered were employees of every color, every age, holding signs, Equity Works, Dignity First, We See You. The walls behind them displayed framed photos of former janitors, night stalkers, cashiers promoted to managers. Names and faces of staff the company had once overlooked. Marcus placed a hand on one photo of himself as a young stockroom worker, sleeves rolled up, determined eyes. He felt tears again. He turned to his father, now standing with daughter and grandson behind a vendor stand promoting soul food. Look at where it began, he said. His father nodded. Look at where you took it. They both looked at the employees around them, the crowd of workers, smiling, hopeful. Marcus took a deep breath. He knew the journey was far from over. But he also knew this. He never carried that folder for fame. He carried it because someone had to. Because dignity isn't silence. It's speaking even when your voice trembles. Because real change starts when one manager decides to expose what the company doesn't want seen and keeps walking forward. The final audit was ready. Marcus stared at the thick report in front of him. 2 years of investigations, testimonies, hidden pay gaps, racially biased software algorithms, retaliation tactics in middle management, all gathered and validated by a third-party firm. Every detail cross-checked. Every pattern undeniable. The report didn't just hold Metromax accountable. It held an entire corporate culture under a microscope. But there was one more step left. He had asked for a meeting with the board of directors, not the usual quarterly update, but a closed-door session with media presence. The risk was high. Marcus knew some board members had ties to the original executives who brushed complaints under the rug. He also knew some viewed him as too loud, too disruptive. But the truth was no longer his to withhold. As he entered the boardroom that day, he carried the same leather folder he'd first opened 2 years ago, the one filled with policies, evidence, stories from janitors, managers, customers, and whistleblowers. Everyone turned as he approached the table. The cameras rolled silently in the back. HR reps, legal advisors, union observers all present. He began without hesitation. "This report represents more than employee dissatisfaction," Marcus said. "It represents betrayal. Not just of values, but of people." He paced slowly, placing copies of the report in front of each board member. "You entrusted the wrong people for too long. They profited while silencing others. They preserved power by preserving inequality. You know this now. And now you are accountable." A few members shifted uncomfortably. One tried to speak, but Marcus held up a hand. "I am not here for symbolism. I am here for resolution." He outlined the findings. Systematic racial bias in promotion pipelines. Overwhelming targeting of Black and Latino employees for corrective actions. AI surveillance trained on skewed historical data, producing disproportionately punitive alerts. Pay discrepancies hidden through reclassification of roles. And worst, a secret clause buried in vendor contracts allowing certain managers to bypass anti-discrimination protocols for operational discretion. The silence in the room deepened. Then Marcus handed over his resignation letter. "I will not be your shield anymore," he said. "I'll be your mirror. You can ignore me. But you can't ignore this." He slid his folder, now nearly worn through, onto the table. "If you want redemption, you'll publish the full audit. Without edits. And you'll implement the recommended changes within 12 months. Or I walk out that door, and so do the people who believed in this company's soul." There was a long pause. Then the chairwoman of the board, a quiet but respected figure, spoke. "We'll publish it." Marcus met her eyes. "All of it?" She nodded. "All of it." The next day, Metromax issued a public release, the full unredacted report, a timeline of reforms, and a $20 million investment in employee-led diversity councils across all regions. The media storm was massive. But so was the support. Former employees, civil rights organizations, and retail associations praised the move. For the first time, a major corporation had not only acknowledged systemic racial inequity, it had published its own complicity. Within weeks, several other companies followed suit, launching internal reviews of their own systems. Metromax stock wavered briefly, then climbed steadily as consumer trust rebounded and employee satisfaction metrics improved. But for Marcus, the job was done. He quietly cleared his desk the next week. Left the ID badge. Took the folder. As he walked out, Rosa met him by the elevator. "You really did it," she said, tears brimming. "No," he said. "We did." She smiled. "So what now?" "I teach," Marcus said. "I mentor. I write. Maybe I finally open that neighborhood cooperative we always talked about." Rosa nodded. "You'll be good at all of it. I'll make sure the next Marcus doesn't need a folder to be heard." That night, he returned to his father's house for dinner. The table was set with warmth. His father poured a drink, silent pride on his face. His niece handed him a crayon drawing, a smiling man with glasses holding a sign that read fairness. "Uncle Marcus," she said, "they said you changed the store forever." He smiled. "I just helped them see what was always broken." As the night wore on, Marcus sat on the porch, folder in hand. The wind rustled the pages. He thought of everyone who had confided in him, who'd risked their jobs, who kept showing up even when the world erased them. He thought of the woman who tossed him a used coupon and laughed like he was beneath her. He thought of Rosa, who fought beside him when others turned away. He thought of the store manager who once said, "No one cares about people like you." And he realized something powerful. They were wrong. People did care. They just needed someone to listen. Marcus stood, opened the folder one last time, and gently placed its contents in a small box. Not to bury the past but to honor it. Because the story wasn't his alone anymore. It belonged to every voice that had once been silenced. To every shift worked in shadows. To every name removed from consideration. To every laugh that cut too deep. It belonged to the people. And finally, the people had been heard. He looked out into the night, stars barely visible above the city skyline. Then he whispered to no one and everyone at once. It was never just a store.